Alan Dershowitz, noted lawyer, academic, author, most recently of Get Trump. Alan, good to see you. You know, as you hold up your book, I have to say, having read the book, we are now talking about the latest act, which was in your book, which is the case that has come down against President Trump, 18 other defendants, essentially racketeering charges. Talk about this particular case and how serious it is.
Sure. Well, I predicted there'd be an indictment in Fulton County. I didn't predict it would be a RICO charge because it's so unusual to bring a RICO charge, a racketeer charge, against election reform. What this basically says is that Trump and all of the others who have been indicted knew full well that the election was legitimately won by Joe Biden, and they corruptly intended to change the result of an election that they knew was fair. In order to prove this indictment, the prosecution is going to have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt what Trump had in his mind. There are two possible instructions that a judge could give. One, if Trump honestly believed that this election had been stolen, that everything he did was perfectly proper. The other construction might be, even if Trump actually believed that the election was unfair, that belief had to be reasonable. And if he gives that instruction, then Trump is going to be able to introduce mountains of evidence showing that so many other people believed it was stolen. I'm not one of them myself, but he'll be able to show the film 2,000 Mules, which were watched by hundreds of thousands of people, and to be able to show that his belief was reasonable. This case is far from a foregone conclusion of conviction. And even if there is a conviction in a county which is overwhelmingly Democrat, it has a good chance of being reversed on appeal.
Let's start with where it's being tried. Is it possible to move this case, you know, for the reasons you just said, perhaps to a federal court, or is it really it's going to be tried? It's the charges have come down in Georgia. It's going to be tried in Georgia, and that's just the nature of the beast.
My own prediction is that the motion to move it to the federal court will be denied, that the state has jurisdiction over elections, even presidential elections. So I think the judge will have the case tried in Georgia. Now, Georgia is a county that's this county of Georgia overwhelmingly Democrat and anti-Trump. So there may be a motion to move it to another county. But I think it will probably stay in Georgia and most certainly in this county.
Well, let's talk about the fact that there are 19 defendants here, including his former personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. We've got Mark Meadows, former chief of staff. What difference does that make to the chances or the strategy that President Trump will have to deploy?
Well, it's going to be very difficult. The prosecutor has said she wants to try them all together, and she wants to try them all within 6 months. Unheard of in all of American history. To have an indictment this broad, this extensive, covering so many people, to be tried within 6 months, unheard of. Usually a case like this would take a year and a half, 2 years to bring to trial. There'll be hundreds of motions and other kinds of legal procedures, maybe appeals from denials of certain motions, which are sometimes possible. This case is not being tried within 6 months. And there'll be all kinds of skirmishes among the lawyers when you have more than a dozen lawyers representing different clients with different interests. And also, the prosecution is going to have to prove the state of mind of each of the defendants. And each of the defendants may have different states of mind. For example, you may get a defendant who admitted to somebody that, oh, I knew the election was fair. That would be very different from a defendant who has said right from the beginning, like Donald Trump, I firmly believe this election was stolen. So it's very hard to try so many people together in one courthouse so quickly.
We often talk about smoking guns, Alan. There's 41 different counts here. Do you see any ones that are particularly problematic? Or problematic is the wrong term, harsh.
I see some that are extraordinarily weak, trying to get an office holder to violate his oath of office. My God. If everybody who violated their oath of office were to be guilty of a crime, we'd have to hold most congressional and mayoral and gubernatorial discussions in prison. Breaking campaign promises, breaking the oath of office is very common. You know, whenever I see a RICO and a conspiracy conviction, I generally think this is weak. If you have to go to RICO and conspiracy instead of specific crimes. Now, there are specific crimes charged here as well, but they really all come under the rubric of RICO. RICO was designed for organized crime. It's been extended to other organized behaviors, but it's never before, to my knowledge, been applied to election protests. Now, I was part of an election protest in 2000. I represented the citizens of Palm Beach County protesting the butterfly ballot, the hanging chads, all of that. You remember
Bush v. Gore. Yes. In Bush v. Gore, for those who don't remember.
In Bush versus Gore.
Yeah.
And, the Supreme Court said 5-4 that we were wrong. 4 justices said we were right. 5 said we were wrong. I can't imagine anyone trying to bring criminal charges against many of us. Many of the people who fought for Al Gore are the same people who are now trying to put Donald Trump in prison, quite hypocritically.
Now, does the breadth of this case make it, more difficult for the lawyers, or do you think in some ways it makes it easier because it can feel pretty sprawling? I mean, just one of the things with these RICO cases, the penalties, if found guilty, Donald Trump could be facing up to 20 years in jail on some of these charges.
Also mandatory minimums, no probation, and so
no pardon, for example. He can't pardon himself.
It can't be pardoned. So this is a tough case for him if he loses, but he has to lose not only at the trial but on appeal as well. And I think this indictment is vulnerable to many, many legal challenges, and there will be other challenges based on the judge's instruction, based on the jury veneer, based on a range of other factors. There'll be defendants who move for a severance saying, look, I have only a peripheral connection to this case, or I was just acting as a lawyer. This is a case that endangers also the role of lawyers in challenging elections. Lawyers are going to be more reluctant
because they're co-defendants.
Bush versus Gore.
Yeah,
because they'll be afraid of indictments.
We've talked about 4 cases. We've had the initial case with Alvin Bragg in New York. We've had the cases with the special counsel around January 6th, the documents. Where does this rank in seriousness?
Okay, in my book, Get Trump, I go through each of the 4 charges, and I show the New York is the weakest. The strongest is Florida, although the case itself is based on possession of classified material, which is not as big a deal as trying to overturn an election. So the strongest case on the facts is Florida. The weakest case, both in facts and law, is New York. And the Washington, D.C. case and Fulton County cases are very similar. They both allege election fraud, and I think they both require specific intent on the part of Donald Trump and the other defendants, specific knowledge, subjective knowledge that the election was in fact not stolen. And I think in both cases, it's going to be hard to prove it. Now, it'll be easier in D.C. in front of a jury that's 95% voters voting against Trump. A little more difficult in Georgia, where it was basically 3-1, not 20-1. So the realities of where the case is being tried may certainly have an impact on the outcome, at trial at least.
So now that we have all 4 indictments in place, what are the next strategies for the president? He's currently on the campaign trail. He also faces, I know, some civil cases that are still ongoing. Should he just ignore it at this point, let his lawyers do what they do and get on with campaigning, or should he be careful?
Can't do that, because he has to be personally at the trial. It's a criminal trial, not a civil trial.
Yep.
You can have your lawyers represent you. So he's going to have to be in court during many of the days that he wants to be on the campaign trail. If the schedule is what the prosecutors want it to be, he'll be on trial in January in Washington, D.C., in February and March in Georgia, in May in the other places, New York, maybe June or July. So the entire campaign season will be taken up by him being in court. Now, that may not be intended as election interference, but the effect is election interference.
Although the poll numbers seem to go up, so that's not, doesn't seem to be impacting
poll numbers among Republicans seem to go up among his supporters. Whether they go up among independent voters, general voters, that remains to be seen. But that's a factor. But the important thing is what precedent this sets for how to challenge elections. Remember, you're supposed to challenge elections by coming up with alternate slates of electors, by going to court. We don't want people challenging elections in the streets. We don't want people doing what they did in Ecuador, shooting the candidate they don't approve of. No, we want them to do exactly what was done in Bush versus Gore and Thomas Jefferson's election, Tilden versus Hayes, the Kennedy election. You go to court. You propose alternate slates of electors. You lobby people who are in the state structures. That's what was charged here. I mean, just imagine, what if it turned out, I'm not saying it did, I don't believe it did, but what if it turned out Trump was right and the election in Georgia was fraudulent? We'd be applauding him for doing exactly what he's been indicted for. And if he believed it was right, you have to look at the case through his eyes, through his mind, not through the mind of the prosecutors or even you or me.
Let me just ask, through your eyes right now, do you feel like President Trump did anything wrong in these cases that we're talking about? Anything?
I think he did a lot wrong.
Criminally wrong, then? Wrong. Culpable?
I think he did a lot wrong. I think he should have conceded the election. He shouldn't have made the speech of January 6th. He shouldn't have gotten all these lawsuits filed. He shouldn't have had alternate slate of electors, but not a single one of them, in my view, is criminal.
Okay.
There's an enormous difference between doing wrong. That's why I'm not going to vote for him.
I feel
because
it's only
he did wrong, but that's not criminal.
I feel it's only fair before we end to pivot to Hunter Biden, because I feel like let's talk about that case that's ongoing with the special counsel, and I know you've had some issues with how that's playing out.
Yeah, the special counsel was appointed unlawfully. The rule requires specifically that the special counsel be somebody outside of government, and there's a good reason for that. You don't want that special counsel to be subject to the whims and preferences of the administration. You want him to be totally an outsider. You certainly don't want the special counsel to be somebody who's already made a deal that the courts have rejected, and he's going to try to defend and justify that deal. So he's precisely the wrong person to have been appointed special counsel, and I'm really disappointed.
What is the logic?
Garland, who I thought highly of for making that appointment.
Why would they make it? Is there any logic in making it other than perhaps he knows the details of the case?
I think that's the reason. He knows the details of the case, and he has already said it's a small case, a case warranting no jail time. And so that's what's wrong with appointing somebody like that. The man who appointed him, Merrick Garland, was appointed, obviously, by President Biden, serves at his pleasure. The special prosecutor was not appointed by him, was appointed by Donald Trump, but now serves at the pleasure of the president as U.S. attorney for the Delaware district. So it's exactly the wrong person to be special counsel. There's nothing special about him. He's just another Justice Department lawyer.
Let me ask, as we're heading to looking around the corner, obviously legal issues are not a popularity contest. Maybe they are, but does it matter what the public feels with regard to these specific cases? Let's go back to President Trump. We may love them, we may hate them, but they will play out as they play out in the various courts. What difference do you think it makes? Yeah, courts plural.
Courts are enormously subject to public pressures. Judges want to come home to their families at night and their friends and be accepted. Judges don't want to have happen to them what happened to me on Martha's Vineyard when I defended President Donald Trump, and I got canceled libraries, synagogue, book fairs, centers. Judges are people like all of us, and they're deeply influenced by public opinion.
So anything else on your radar right now you'd want to put on ours, Alan?
I think this is a sad day for America. On my podcast, which I have Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday on Rumble and YouTube, I give out bananas, how close we are to becoming a banana republic. It used to be 2, but after this indictment, I'm up to 3 and perhaps 4. I don't want to see us move any closer to Ecuador, where they killed the person running against them, or some other countries where they imprison people who run against the president, the incumbent president. This is a terrible development in America, to try to weaponize the criminal justice system against one's strongest opponent. It's wrong, and it should stop.
Okay. Thank you for your insights, Alan. Always appreciate it.